This episode is brought to you by BigMooseCoffeeCompany.co. Pals, welcome. Welcome and thanks for stopping by once again for another episode of Everything Endurance. I do hope you've been enjoying these episodes over the last few months as much as I have. I've been taking a lot of inspiration from them personally. I've been out and run 4 times in the last week. If that doesn't sound like a big deal to you, a lot of you guys, that's 4 more times than I ran last year. So something about talking to all these amazing inspirational people over the last few weeks has definitely rubbed off on me. So hopefully a little bit of it's rubbing off on you guys as well, and you are getting out there and starting to stretch your legs a bit and get some adventure again in your lives. Also, thanks for the response to the last couple of episodes. We've been getting some really good feedback about that. It was a bit of a new area for us. If you look back through our list of guests previously, it's sort of elite fitness coaches, adventurers and ultra runners with multiple wins and FKTs and records and all that sort of stuff. And the last couple of guests we've spoken to have been people much earlier on in that sort of process, people who have just got their first major race win under their belts, and it's just opened up a whole new world to them, and they're now deciding what they're going to do in the future with, what had previously been a hobby and a love of theirs, a passion, which has turned into something that, in the case of the Simon Dix episode, he's now really looking to make a life out of and make a livelihood out of. Or the last episode with Cassia, she's managed to get herself a sponsor now and a world-class coach. And I mean, who knows what's going to happen for those guys in the next few years. And I really look forward to talking to them again a couple of years down the line when we've got an idea of what they've been up to. But go back and have a listen. It's really inspiring stuff, really interesting to talk to people about the process of grabbing that first ever podium and the positivity that's now swept them into the next stage of their life. So yeah, go back, have a listen. Top stuff. I've got a great guest today. A really great guest. I've been hoping to talk to this person for ages, but they're not the easiest person to pin down. Our guest today is an ultra runner with a stellar CV, podiums in some really big races, but not a professional athlete. This is a runner whose job is astonishing, and it's amazing that she finds the time and mental energy to dedicate herself to the ultra running as well. And we're going to talk a lot about that. But alongside being this ultra runner of note internationally, she's also a human rights lawyer working for the UN. She's been based, while she's been pulling off these marvelous feats of mountain running, she's been training in South Sudan or in Palestine, or more recently in secure compounds in the middle of Afghanistan. This is a woman who's going to take away all of your excuses for not going out for a run. I blame her for most of the runs I've been out and done this week. On top of that, she's also the founder and president of Free to Run, an absolutely wonderful and fascinating charity who does really important work in advocating adventure sports and participation in sport for women in areas of major conflict. I just think you're really going to enjoy her stories today. And a lot of you will have guessed already. Our guest today is Stephanie Case. Or should we just go for Steph?
Yeah, either or. I'm good with either.
Well,
or
when
Kaser.
You came into this Zoom call, Kaser.
Yeah, when I talk to myself, like really, harshly on the trail, I call myself Kaser.
I like that. If I've got to have a word with myself, I go for the surname. I always think it's more formal. Like, come on, Roberts. Yeah, fair enough. Or I did like Steffers, which is what came up as you entered the Zoom call before.
Yeah, that's what my family sometimes calls me. So
brilliant. Okay, so we've got a lot of permutations of your name. Anyone who's listening out there, you can pick whichever one you're comfortable with. We seem to be fine with that. So, Steph, where am I talking to you? Where are you at the moment? Because I get the impression that you could be in a lot of different places depending on when you pick up the phone.
That's true. And in the next 24 hours, I will be. So right now I'm at my home in Chamonix, France. And tomorrow morning, I will be heading back to Kabul, Afghanistan, where I am working. Yeah.
So for an ultra runner, you are currently living and running around in like the mecca for ultra running, one of the greatest places on earth to come and run trails and run around the mountains. But how long are you going to be heading over to Kabul for?
I'm unsure at the moment. I mean, the COVID-19 situation in Afghanistan is really bad. We're not even close to the peak at the moment. And, some people have had to get medevaced out. So they generally don't want people coming back. But some parts of my work need me to go back, basically. And yeah, so I've got a quarantine for the first 14 days. And, it's not like the other quarantines that I did in Canada and France during this period. I mean, it will literally be locked in my room inside an armed compound for 14 days with no access to delivery or yeah. So I'm really dreading it. I mean,
wow, I'm sorry to bring it up then.
Yeah. No, this is kind of my last night of freedom for a bit, but it's fine. I mean, it's only 14 days. I'll get through it. And I am allowed to go run around the compound between 4 and 5 a.m. with a mask. So I will be doing that.
Wow. I quite openly and vocally complained about lockdown a few weeks ago because I was fed up of watching Netflix. I am sorry. I am sorry I ever felt hard done by. And you know what? I want to come back to this later and talk about how on earth you fit a ultra running training schedule into small concrete compounds and the security restrictions that you live around. I mean, we're talking about the whole world is currently in one way, shape or form, wherever you are, dealing with some form of lockdown. But this is something you've been trained for, right? You've spent quite a lot of time in these kind of very, very secure, very limited circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting at the start of the lockdowns, the start of the pandemic, watching everyone go through this process of, what it was like to be on lockdown. And depending on where you were, it was extreme or not extreme. I think those in Italy had it quite bad. And at the beginning, people kind of thought it was, they were making the best of it. They might have thought, oh, this is unique. This is fun. We'll run up and down the stairs in our apartments. And, and I was just looking at it thinking, oh God, I've been doing this shit for years. I can't, it's not cute. It is not cute and it's going to wear off. And then it did. And then you saw the anger come out. It's kind of like going through the 7 stages of grief. But yeah, I mean, I think I understood well the frustrations that people had, because when I go into these places, I actively choose it. It's not that I want to, but I've chosen to take this job. I've chosen to take this, lifestyle. I have a purpose. And so in that way, it's a little bit easier to take. And I also know it's only for defined periods. In Gaza, I was there for 8 weeks at a time. In South Sudan, when I was in a tent, it was 3 months at a time. And in Afghanistan, it's 6 weeks at a time. And no matter what the time period is, it helps to have a defined time period. And I think what made the lockdown so difficult, especially for runners, from what I saw, is that one, they didn't choose it. That wasn't something that they took on as a necessary drawback to something that they really wanted to do. Yeah. And they didn't know when it would end. And, that's really destabilizing for a lot of people. So I kind of got that side of it.
Well, thank you for taking us all off the hook to an extent there. I do appreciate it. It did make me feel better. But yeah, I suppose you'd been through a lot of training for this scenario before you were dropped into it. Well, you know what? I'm going to stick a pin in that and we're going to come back to Kabul in a little while. But I want to start off by going a little bit further. For the benefit of anyone who isn't aware of who Steph Case is, this is a runner with not only an incredible work CV, and I could do a couple of hours podcast, which would probably just be me sitting here drinking coffee and listening to you talk about what you do for a living and how you've got into that. And that's amazing. But you have a huge ultra running CV as well. I'd like to go back just a little bit further and see where that started for you. It's something I do with all of our guests. Like, what What brought you into the utterly ridiculous world of ultra running, which has turned out to be your place where you find adventure?
Yeah. Well, I never was really a runner. I mean, I can remember being young in like grade 5 or something, and just kind of rocking up to a cross country race, and finishing at the very, very, very top of the couple hundred other children that were there. But I remember being so embarrassed that my face turned red, and really self conscious, that I just didn't do it again. And, it's just so stupid. And I think back to that a lot of times. I just really didn't have the confidence. I was not a cool kid. I was not an athlete. I was a geek. I was good at math. I was good at science. I was in, the wind ensemble, playing the flute. And, being an athlete wasn't part of my identity. So I didn't do it, in school, in high school, in college. I did get into rowing, and then made the varsity rowing team when I was in university. But, as much as I like the sport aspect of it and kind of trying to see myself as an athlete, the restrictions on weight and the kind of what it did to, me and my teammates as like young, impressionable women who, doesn't take a lot of pressure and focus on your weight for women of that age to actually really have detrimental effects. And it kind of saw me going in a bad direction where, thin was good, light was good. And I really didn't want to have that relationship with food. And so I got out of it, and I signed up for a half marathon. I think I thought 21 kilometers sounded like a really long way, and I did it. It was fine. And then when I was in law school, I signed up for a marathon, and I thought it would be this like epic event that would just change my life. And like, again, I hate it when I say this because I don't want to take away all of the hard work that people do in marathons. But for me, I just felt ridiculous. But I had trained for so many months, and I trained so hard. And then it was over in a few hours. And like, like for what? I don't know. Something wasn't ringing true for me. I didn't crawl across the finish line. I mean, it was hard, but it wasn't. At any point, you can just stop and walk, and you might be 5 minutes slower, but like, who cares what your time is? So yeah, my personality, my mindset, it just didn't really fit in with that. And then I think after that, I went and climbed Kilimanjaro, which of course is like it's not just a long hike. Now I sound like an idiot, but it's not like a technical climbing thing.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who've done it. You wouldn't necessarily call them all athletes. Yeah.
Right. And once I did that, I was like, this is cool. Something that's multiple days. You've got like something big that you can focus on. It wasn't over in a couple of hours. Your time didn't matter, but it felt more primal, like mountain, climb, get to the top. Yes. And the only thing I didn't like about it was that it was just a bit too slow. So I said, okay, how can I combine these things between, some kind of big adventure and the racing aspect of it? And that's when I just started Googling, the self-supported multi-day races. And then I found one. It was a Race in the Planet race in Vietnam. And I asked all of my colleagues. I was working at the British Columbia Court of Appeal at the time. And I asked all of them if they would sign up. And of course, no one wanted to. Who wants to run 250 kilometers?
I know, you'd have to be crazy, right?
Yeah. So, I eventually just signed up after like a night of drinking, I think. And then that was kind of it.
Alcohol has been responsible for so many of the adventures that I've come across on this show. It's no shame.
But thank goodness, right? Yeah. I mean, because honestly, like I'm not a very good runner, but I think I'm a good endurance runner. And it's a strange thing to think, because like, if you're not a very good basketball player, then why would you think that you'd be a great basketball player at like a higher level? Do you know what I mean? And the only way to really discover if you're a good endurance runner is to keep doing something that you're maybe so at, for a really, really long time.
I guess the really important descriptor there is that they are endurance races, right? This isn't necessarily about forming yourself into scientifically the sharpest possible tool to achieve that job. This is about being able to, hammer that nail for 4 days at a time,
Yeah, but to a certain extent, technique comes into it. I mean, all these things come into it. Otherwise, you're going to get injuries. So it does seem counterintuitive. A lot of people think, oh, it's crazy. How did you, get into ultra running? And they assume that I would have loved running from the beginning, and I didn't. I hate the first 2 hours of any run still. I hate it. I mean, it just sucks. You just have to keep doing it to get a little bit further.
You try convincing somebody who's not into running that, no, honestly, it's fine. You just have to get through the first full 2 hours of it.
Yeah.
It's a difficult sell.
I mean, I'm changing my words a bit. Normally when I'm talking about the races I do, I say you just have to get through the first day. And then once you're on the second morning, it's much better.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what happened? When was this? When was the big multi-day in Vietnam? The first time you went and found that adventure that fits this little framework you've built for yourself?
Yeah, that was the beginning. It was February 2008.
Okay, so we're going back a fair while.
Yeah, I'm old.
No, not what I was getting at. More that ultra running, quite often when I'm talking to people, is something that they've come to a little bit later in life even, whereas it's unusual to be talking to somebody in their 30s who's talking about an ultra running career that goes back more than a decade.
Yeah, true. I mean, I think I was 25 at the time.
Yeah. I don't see a lot of that on the races I work on. No.
Yeah, especially the multi-day, because they usually are a bit more expensive.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, I just kind of went out there. It was a smaller race. There were only, I think, about 60 of us, but I'd kind of trained for it. I was quite injured in my training because, of course, I did everything wrong, and I was just going in hoping to finish. And it was going to be the classic kind of MDS type of format where you do a marathon a day, carrying all your stuff. And then on day 5, there's a double. But there had been a mudslide due to the weather that they had in the area. And so day 1 was like 110K when your pack was the heaviest, right out of the block. And I was not prepared for that. But I ended up finishing that like first female and second overall. And that was the first time I'd run more than, I think, maybe 50K. So that was quite cool. Yeah. That was pretty cool. And then I thought, wow, this works. And then, of course, day 2, I got completely lost and ran 4 hours in the wrong direction. But, it was still a really good race overall for me. And that's kind of what I think just made me keep doing it, really.
So what is it that you find while you're out there on these very, very, very long runs? Because for some people listening to this, the idea of that 2 hours of running is huge. And that's where you're just getting into warming up territory. What is it that you found out there 2, 3, 4 days into an event that you didn't find when you were 2, 3, 4 hours into a marathon?
I mean, I think the fact that it just really... these races completely strip you down to your bare, authentic self, like the good and the bad. I mean, I've had my ugliest moments and my, proudest moments on the trail. And I think there's something quite confronting, but also healing about that kind of experience. I mean, I always say it's in an ultra, it's a time where you feel extreme vulnerability and extreme strength. Often at the same time or often at competing times. And I really like doing that because I don't think, at least for me, I don't spend enough time with myself and concentrating on myself and my thoughts. I'm usually, working or dealing with other people's problems or, watching reality television and just turning into a zombie if I'm trying to de-stress from work. And there's nowhere to hide when you're out on the trail. You are just there with your thoughts, with the good and with the bad. And it's a really special time to work through whatever you need to work through. And yeah, I find that the people who are most comfortable with themselves and most comfortable with their own vulnerability tend to do well in these types of races. Whereas those who, maybe are struggling. Maybe this is getting too philosophical, but I just think people who are still struggling with their own identities, their own, issues in their own lives, that's when it really hits them, is out on the trail. And a lot of times people drop out of races. It's not because they're not physically able. We're physically able to do a lot more than we think. It's because mentally they break down. This is my theory.
You know what? I'd be inclined to agree with you on that. I mean, it's not going to be the case every time, but I've watched some runners roll into checkpoints in a physical condition where you think, even me, having worked alongside these races for a long time, I watch them come in and I think, no, like it can't be. They must have broken a leg. They've shambled in. They're barely moving. But if you can turn them around mentally, if they can turn a corner mentally, they'll suddenly spring up and move on again afterwards. And I've always marveled at people's ability to do that. And equally, people who you thought were in physically good condition and were a dead cert to make it to the end that just haven't been able to find it in them to make their legs keep going that day. And who knows what was going on in their lives at that moment of time that meant that they couldn't get around that corner. But it happens. And in those moments, you've got to be extremely resilient and face the fact that you didn't do this thing. There's a lot to be learned about yourself in that environment. Yeah. No, I'm not going to skip ahead to the Barclay or anything yet. Let's come to that in a little while. Where next then? So Vietnam, we're going back to 2008. I don't want to skip over it too much, but would it be about 2014? You came to the Arctic, didn't you? You did the Beyond the Ultimate Ice Ultra, which is balmy. I promise anyone listening to this that I didn't know that when I asked Steph if she'd be on the show. That's something I've been told since. That was before my time. You enjoy the Arctic?
I did, so yeah, it was a funny story how I got involved, because I'd done a few multi-day races by then, and I think I'd done a couple 100-milers by then. And I was actually in a really difficult period in my life, because I had left my job in Kyrgyzstan. I'd brought a gender discrimination complaint against my boss, so that wasn't very comfortable.
Oh, wow.
I'd moved countries. I'd moved to Hong Kong to be with my partner, and then got dumped after 13 days.
Oh man, yeah, this is ideal training territory.
Oh, I mean, it was just horrendous. So there I am, unemployed, brokenhearted, just, moving back in with my parents in Canada in the winter. And I thought, what am I doing? And I think it was a friend, someone might have sent me an email, but there was a guy who was doing a study on basically the psychological aspects of ultra runners. And so if you saw, it was maybe 2 weeks before the race, I think, or maybe at most 3. And so we got an email. Anyone who was willing to participate in a psych study would get this massive discount on the race. And how many people are willing to sign up to a multi-day, couple 100-kilometer race in the Arctic on no training? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So, so I ordered my snowshoes online. I think I used them once just in the parking lot of my parents' condo building. And the week, I think maybe it was even 2 days before, or the day of, basically right before I was going to the airport, I got a notification that I had gotten a job in South Sudan. So I was going to be going pretty much to Arctic, and then heading off to live in a tent in a war zone. So my head was in a billion different places. I didn't know what I was doing. And I thought, oh, it's fine. I mean, it's going to be so cold. We're going to run on the snow, and we'll only have to use our snowshoes for, this one little section that's going to be deep powder. But of course, the temperature was warmer than everyone expected, and we ran all 240K on the snowshoes, which I'd never used before. So it was, it was a pretty cool experience. And I don't know how I turned out on the psych study stuff.
Well, if the person who did that study is out there listening, we'd love to see that file. And I ran that race as a runner in 2017, fully expecting to have my snowshoes on my back most of the time. And we had a soft snow year. So same here. About 210 of those 230 kilometers I did with plastic strapped to my feet.
I mean, I have to say it was a great race. It was beautiful. I'm not a snow person, but it was stunning. And then, yeah, the after party was great. There's a photo of me passed out on top of a stuffed bear somewhere that we'll just keep keep hidden.
Yeah, well, I know the lads. I imagine they'll still have that photo. I know which bear you mean as well. It's in the lobby of Hotel Yorkmark.
Yeah, exactly. I was straddling it with a piece of chocolate cake, I think.
Wow, what a happy memory. For you more than the bear, obviously, but
yeah. Well, I mean, who knows? I have to ask him.
Yeah, well, I hope he had a good run. Well, incredible. But so here's a question that sprang to mind when you were talking there. I think most ultra runners, they have a different reason for why they do their events, and the why is often very, very important as a motivation. But for a lot of them, it's quite a meditative experience, and the long training runs, the time in isolation, that calm, that quiet is what draws them in, because they lead very stressful lives outside it. For others, they seem to lead very high stress lives, and they don't seem to be able to switch that off. They bring that into ultra running, which can, as we've touched on, be a very emotionally stressful experience in itself. Is that what keeps you coming back to it? Because your work life sounds wild to somebody uninitiated in the world of international politics, and when you if looking at your CV, you only need to look at the locations that you've been based in as you go around for most people to go, whew, she must be crazy. And what is it that keeps you doing this very, very ultra running, which is hugely consuming of time and energy, alongside what you do for work?
Yeah. I mean, I think actually the two sustain each other. You know, I don't know if I would be able to do ultra running as well if I didn't have my work, because my work gives me a lot of motivation and reason to keep running, and running helps me do the work that I'm doing. And the way that I mean that is, you know, when you're out on the trail, if it's, you know, you're on day 2, day 3, whatever day it is, you're hurting, you're hungry, you can smell yourself rotting, you know, things are bleeding, you're just miserable, and it's raining or whatever it is. And there's a lot of reasons why you would stop. But you know, for me, it's quite easy to step out of that. Well, it's usually easier, I think, to step out of that and say, you know, look, you have complete freedom right now. You are on the trails, moving through nature. No one is harming you. You have chosen this. This is a privilege to be able to have both legs at work. This is a privilege to be in a country where you don't have to worry about stepping on mines. This is a privilege to have the money and, you know, the time and the ability to be able to train for and to sign up for one of these things. And this is for your own benefit. So, like, buck up, Kaser. and, you know, get on with it. How many women and girls would, you know, just wish that they even had the opportunity to suffer like you're suffering now? Because it's a very privileged kind of suffering. I mean, it's not really suffering. It can stop at any time you choose. And that's something that really helps get me through the low moments in racing. And, you know, similarly, my work is really quite stressful, emotionally stressful, sometimes physically stressful, not because I'm doing manual labor, but because I'm in weird places, usually have some kind of gastro bug, you know, stuck under lockdowns. And just actually the stress alone and the insomnia is quite bad. I spend a lot of my time looking at dead bodies and listening to victims talk about, you know, what they've been through and what they've had to endure. And I need like a really extreme release to help me, you know, continue that kind of a job. And I get that out on the trail, and it just gives me both of them give me immense perspective. Sometimes when I have to pull an all-nighter at work, I think, well, at least, I'm not on day 3 of a of a run, and I've got all the food I want, and I can sit on a toilet when I go to the bathroom. So, the ultra runs give me perspective in my work, and vice versa.
Well, yeah, you've stolen the word there from me, so I don't know what I'm going to say now, which was perspective. The one seems to give you the perspective to cope with the other in a way. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. Because in the end, I've chosen both. I've chosen the work. I feel like it's a privilege to do the work I've done. It doesn't mean it's not hard. Ultras are the same. We choose it. Doesn't mean it's not hard, but there's no point in complaining about it. This is something we've chosen. If you don't want to do it, don't do it.
Yeah, fair enough. Maybe don't go into motivational speaking with that line, but you're absolutely right. Okay, so sorry. Taking a little bit of a step forward then. If you look at your running CV, and I've trolled through your website, I do a little bit of research. 16 and 17 seem like very big years for you. How do they run alongside your career? Because you're talking about jumping from a race in the Arctic to living in a tent in Sudan, and then you're going to be over in Kabul. You've spent time in Iraq as well. Is that right to say?
Palestine, not Frida runs in Iraq, but I haven't been based in
Oh, okay, fair enough. I made an assumption there. That was my fault.
No. So I was in Gaza from 2014 to 2016. So when I came out about middle of the year in 2016, I took a position in Geneva. And so that was going to be kind of the start of really great time for me in running. It was my first time out of Warzones in quite a while.
And here you are now you're in Geneva, so you're not far from where you are now. It's brilliant running territory.
Yeah. So, that was going to be, the time after that was going to be quite big for me. But then, as I think, I got into quite a bad accident about 6 months later, at the beginning of 2017. Which I thought was just going to derail everything. But turns out, 2017 was probably one of my best years. And then I returned back to Afghanistan at the beginning of 2018. Yeah.
I'm not going to make you sort of pick apart the minutiae of that injury and that accident. I know you've talked about it on other podcasts and stuff, but given where you work on a day-to-day basis and the places that you've run and some of the extreme things you've done, it was quite a sort of safe-ish sounding environment comparatively you were in when just a freak little thing happened and then you're in intensive care. And you were quite badly injured from what I heard. It was broken ribs, punctured lung, lacerated liver. So you've done a good job there.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's an experience that I think about constantly, and I think I will for the rest of my life, because while I recovered quite quickly, I was out running again, 3.5 weeks later. So I think a lot of even, some of my close friends didn't really think it was that big of a deal. Okay, you spend a few days in intensive care, spent, 10 days in the hospital, but then, she's back running, so it's fine. But the pivotal thing for me was that, I was alone. And I tumbled down the mountain. I slipped on a run, wasn't able to stop, hit a tree, and I was completely alone. And the difference between me dying there alone and maybe not being found for a little bit of time, and me recovering in a hospital and then running 3.5 weeks later was, 11% battery on my phone, which is just too narrow of a margin to really wrap your brain around. My phone had already died, and I'd put it in my inside my sports bra to try to warm it up, because you can kind of get your phone to turn on again. And I was just lucky that I hit the tree on the other side of my body, and that my phone wasn't smashed, and that it did turn on, and it had enough juice to allow me to make that call. Yes, it's absolutely my own fault that I didn't have an emergency communication device other than my phone. That's idiotic, and I take that on. I think it's something a lot of us do. If you're just going for run around. We don't have signal in some places. And if it's not a scary adventure, you might not think to bring a GPS device. So yeah, for me, that everything changed after that moment, because no matter what I've been through and, the various places I've worked, I've had tough situations there where there've been nearby attacks, when colleagues have been killed, but it's very different to kind of know that you're in a dangerous situation and then be faced directly with the moment where you might not survive, and to feel that moment. So that was a pretty pivotal time.
Yeah. 3.5 weeks of recovery time makes it sound like a much smaller deal than it ultimately was. And from what I remember from, was it the Tough Girl podcast? That was it. You mentioned on there that the Italian doctors who first spoke to you told you it'd be a year before you ran again.
Yeah. I was so upset. I mean, I was also on a lot of drugs, so I wasn't thinking super clearly, but yeah, I was Facebooking from the hospital on so much morphine. I mean, it just it should never have happened.
Do they still come up with Facebook memories every now and then? You're like, oh God.
Exactly. But when they told me that I wouldn't be able to run, I was devastated. I was absolutely devastated. And, when I asked for another opinion, they sent a psychologist to my room instead of another doctor. And I was like, I don't need my head checked. I need another opinion. And I think it's just the difference between, it's not that they were wrong. I mean, many people who had that injury, and 6 broken ribs, a grade 3 liver laceration. So I had quite a lot of internal bleeding, and a punctured lung. I mean, it takes months to actually recover from that. But, I was healthy going into it. My legs weren't broken, and your liver can heal. It was very, critical at the time, but once it heals, it can heal very quickly. So the biggest issue was just, I think, tiredness, and then just pain from the broken ribs, because I couldn't lie down for about 7 weeks.
But you were running in 3.5.
Yeah. Well, my doctors that I worked with, they were like sports specific doctors. And so they knew me a bit from kind of treating me on my chronic issues ahead of time. And they knew how important it was for me and for my identity, and also for my mental recovery. I mean, that was really the biggest thing from the accident, was mentally recovering from this moment where, you face just dying alone, really. And running again was the quickest way that I could get back to it. And they knew that. And if it's just, there's pain, as we all know, in races, there's pain that's like dangerous pain that's warning us to stop doing what we're doing. And then there's pain that's just pain, and it's not harming us. And that's the kind of pain that I was feeling from running with the broken ribs.
Wow. And, as we've touched on, your ultra running for you, and that time you spend out on your feet in the wilderness, is part of how you manage the trauma that you see on a sort of, I was about to say daily basis. I don't know if that's a fair representation of what your work life is. Wow.
That's accurate.
Then, to have that taken away from you is going to be very detrimental to your mental health over the next year. I can understand then why you'd be looking at this going, no, I need to run. And it needs to happen immediately. But what I've got to ask, what kind of pain are we talking about? Because ultra runners have a very skewed idea of what hurts and what doesn't, and pain thresholds are very different and able to endure discomfort that most people would describe as pain. But how much does it hurt to train for ultra marathons 3.5 weeks after 6 broken ribs?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I can describe. Well, first, the pain I can remember most acutely was actually just, trying to go to sleep. I mean, lying down was absolutely not an option. Because there were 6 ribs on the right side of my body that were all broken. Even though I hit the tree at the front, they were all broken at the back. And lying down in any form was impossible, to the point where, you just couldn't breathe. So I would tape them up, and I was supposed to be on tramadol, which I think is a strong opioid maybe.
I think we're in that neck of the woods, but it's definitely a powerful painkiller.
Yeah. So I was supposed to be on that for a good few months. But the one thing the doctor said was I couldn't start running until I was off those. So I just went off the pain meds. And yeah, that did make.
I'm glad I'm not your doctor. I gotta say,
they love me. But it was it was pain kind of on every breath. Just a constant deep pain, sometimes a sharp pain as well, but it was just it's a pain that doesn't go away. And I think to some degree the fact that I knew I wasn't doing damage made it a little bit easier for me to rationalize it. But on the other hand, you think, oh my God, my half of my body is broken and I can feel it every time I breathe. And that's a bit unsettling.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, a bit unsettling sounds like underplaying it a little bit, but I think you might be one of the toughest people I've ever spoken to. No.
I mean, I'm not trying to paint it as if it was like some crazy situation. I mean, it wasn't. I was still running. I think other people would have as well. It's just, you have to think about the pain differently. I mean, I've had to do this in races as well, where like in Tour de Géant, it's 200 miles. You are hurting so badly by the end of it. But as long as you can just reframe it in your head to say, okay, my body is giving me these signals that it's pain, but it's not pain that needs to stop. It's just pain because you've been running for 4 days. So just, get over it, move on. And you reset your pain threshold. You're like, this is the new normal. If there's anything above this, then I need to worry. But this is now what normal is. And just accept it. And if you just accept it and move on, then it's okay.
I think that's kind of what I was driving at as well. In ultra running, you're never going to get to even the end of a single stage race without experiencing discomfort and pain and having to cope with that. And you get to learn what is pain that you should be very alarmed about and what is pain that you're going to accept over the next however many hours or days in order to get to the finish line. And yeah, you end up in a position where you can endure pain that most people wouldn't even consider.
I mean, I get it from my mom. She, her whole back is fused and she's had back issues her whole life. And I think the level of pain that she endures just on a daily basis is higher than any of us would be able to manage if we suddenly just got it. But that's her normal. And so she's actually the best one to talk to in an ultra. I'll call her and she'll be like, well, honey, this is your new normal. Just get on with it.
Yeah, well, thank God for mums, right?
Yeah.
If I'd have had phone signal, I'd love to have been able to ring my mum halfway through the ice ultra. So fair enough. 2000, was it? You mentioned the Tour de Géant there, and that's just reminded me of something. Was it 2016 you got second female there?
Yes, I did it the first time in 2015, but it was cut short.
A terrible weather year, wasn't it?
Oh, it was terrible. And at the point that they cut it, I was in sixth. So I just missed the kind of top five. And then, the next year after that, I came in second female and 14th overall.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. That really is. If anyone's not familiar with the Tour de Géant, don't try and spell it the way it sounds when you Google it. You will get it wrong, but definitely look it up. That's an absolute monster of a mountain race. Was that playing on your mind at all while you were recovering from this injury? That, hang on, I'm just off the back of this amazing performance. I'm not stopping now.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I got my kind of elite invite for Tour de Géant on, I think, the 3rd of January. So that was my third day in the hospital, second full day in the hospital. And I accepted from my hospital bed. I sent them an email and said, yes, I will be there.
You were on some drugs, weren't you? Yeah.
But it was really nice. I mean, I think, as far as I remember, the same guys who were there in the hospital, the policemen who were taking my police report, they were there at Tour de Géant. One of the doctors who had worked at me was there at Tour de Géant.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a close-knit valley in terms of like the people who come around that race. So it felt quite good to be able to come back and run in the valley later that year.
And what you'd done there as well in 2017 is bounce back not only extremely quickly, but very thoroughly as well. I mean, looking at your performances in 2017, it looks like it's a decent argument for it being for the best year of running on your CV, right? You bounced back hard. I mean, what did your training look like at that time? And I'm going past the injury now. Let's assume you're in like 6 out of 10 pain territory. That's fairly normal rather than recovering from the operations. What was training looking like for you at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I was training pretty consistently up to my first race of the year, which was the Madeira Island Ultra Trail, which was in April. So yeah, I'd been recovering for like 3.5 months when I ran that. And I think I was just so focused on, proving to myself that I could race, I could run, everything was normal, that I probably trained a lot more consistently than I normally had. And I also, I hate to say this because I think the whole like weight debate in running is a bit skewed. I've never kind of dropped weight for my running, and I don't think it necessarily helps, but I was maybe 10 to 15 pounds lighter than the normal because of the weight I lost in the hospital. Maybe that helped. I would like to think it didn't, because that's not the message I want to give out.
Well, let's say it didn't.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that.
So good. So yeah, I would attribute it to kind of, I think, my stubbornness and more consistency in training. And then after that, I probably raced too much. I mean, I did like 6 major ultras that year, I think all of them except for maybe one above 100K. And they were all pretty major races. So by the time I got to the end of it, my 6th one, which was Tour de Géant, I was probably a little bit overworked, let's say, because I ended up, I was having a race every 3 weeks. So I would race, I'd kind of recover, do a little bit of running, and then I'd have to stop again to rest. And then I'd race. And then, so my racing just became training for other races. So I think I kind of deteriorated as the year went on.
The 17 race didn't go quite according to plan then.
Yeah. Well, the Tour de Géant one. Yeah. I mean, I ended up just ballooning up. I messed up my electrolytes and I turned into the Michelin Man. I mean, I was enormous. I was so big, and from my stomach to my legs to my face. I mean, it was just, I had like probably an extra 20, 25 pounds of water on me.
My God.
Yeah, no, I was huge and just kind of waddling along. And then, I spent at least the last couple of days of the race pretty comfortably in third, just waddling along. And, I got to the last climb, and I don't know. I don't know if it had something to do with the accident or not, but it was snowing, and it was, I mean, obviously you're tired. I'd been running for, 90 hours without much sleep. And, it was a bit dark and I was alone, and I just completely broke down when I got into the refuge, and I was just hysterically sobbing, really inconsolable. And I didn't care at that point about the race. I was like, I couldn't give a shit whether I'm in third or I'm in 300th. I was just kind of done. And then, because I was so cold, they kind of stripped me down just to my, underwear and my sports bra. And at that point, the medical doctor saw my leg, which one of my legs was just not only was it huge, but it was completely mottled in like purple bruises. I don't know what was going on, but it looked like it had gangrene. Wow. And so at that point, they were like, okay, you're done. You're out. And as soon as someone told me that they were taking me out of the race, then I was like, oh, no, you don't. So they agreed I could keep going, but I had to hang out for a while and go with a group. And the woman who was in fourth came and went past, and it wasn't even like, I wasn't disappointed at all. I was like, go for it. And I ended up finishing in fourth, and it was great. I looked like a bear had attacked me when I crossed the finish line, because one of my trademark moves in races is I usually like cut the shorts out of my running skirts, or this time I cut my pants into like this jagged makeshift skirt. I mean, I was a mess. I was so mess.
Well, you referred to yourself as a mess there. You still came over the line fourth. That's a bit of a monstrous performance.
Yeah, I mean, I'll show you a photo.
Okay, that's at least 2 pictures we've got to go back and look for after this podcast now.
Well, I mean, I think it's important because there are so many runners who run, near the top who finish and they look, just perfect, and they're smiling and their clothes are clean, and
it's really irritating.
It's very irritating. That is never going to be me. I will always vomit or get diarrhea or have bloody knees or balloon up. I mean, to run these races, you don't have to get everything right. You can get everything wrong and still do just fine.
Amazing. Well, that's what you in the mountains looks like then. We've sort of talked about what you're training like there. I'm ready now. Let's talk about Kabul. Let's put you there. How on earth are you training for an ultramarathon in the compounds where you live? And can you give us a bit of an idea of what space we're talking about there when you're in country?
Yeah. So the compound that I live in most of the time, I'd say the longest stretch of road, I think it's about 800 meters if you go from, all the way to the guard tower and back, maybe closer to 600 meters. I keep kind of getting it wrong. But it's not that big. The compound used to feel bigger when I was there in 2012 because there were more little loopholes and areas I could run around. But with the security situation being the way it is, more and more fences have gone up. And then it means I can't, all of my secret little routes that I used to have, I can't use. But I still have a pretty good circuit. Just by doing lots of loops around people's accommodations, which they love. Sometimes even running through some of the office buildings after hours so I can, just get something different. Running in different directions, running at night. I tried different techniques, but to get in even just 10K, it's pretty... it's pretty monotonous, especially, I've run every inch of that compound over the years. And, since November, I've been living at a different compound, which is much smaller. And you can't really run outside at all. So it's just gym. And that's, just because we had a UN colleague, who was killed in an attack, last November, and I was commuting every day between the compounds, and that didn't really make a lot of sense. So I moved into the compound that I worked in, but it meant that I gave up a lot of space. So it was just treadmill after that. Which is not easy. But, beyond the physical space, I think the other limiting factors are the pollution. The pollution in Kabul, particularly in the winter, is so bad. I mean, after a run, my eyes will just be bright red just from the grit. You can even feel it, even in your teeth. And, even when I left at the start of the pandemic and I went to Canada, after every run, I would just be in a coughing, fit for at least 45 minutes, which of course, everyone loves in the middle of COVID.
Oh my days. Yeah, of course.
I don't have COVID. I've had a test. But it was really just, it was like I was developing asthma just from the pollution. So it was quite bad. And then the main limiting factor, I think, is just the stress. Sometimes we all use running to help relieve stress, but sometimes when the stress gets so high, you really just don't want to get out of bed. And I found that quite difficult. So at some point, I just committed to myself, no matter what, just go out, even if it's 10 minutes, turn it into 20, turn it into 30, whatever. But I think the mental aspects of it were, the stress was the biggest challenge.
I think you get a pass when it comes to that as well. Because you're absolutely right. And in periods of great stress, there's a lot of benefit to be found in running, but not a lot of motivation to go out and do it. At least that's very much my experience. All I really want to do is for someone to give me a hug and let me lay down somewhere quietly for a couple of hours. And it's difficult to push yourself through more suffering and struggling when you're in that mindset.
In a compound, it's not like you're really escaping because when you're running, you are running past all of your colleagues. You know, people will see you and they're like, oh, hey, and then they'll just want to talk about something having to do with work. You've got, you know, warplanes going on overhead. So it's not like you're having this, you know, hour of escapism running through the woods. I mean, you're just running amidst work and war, frankly.
We were talking very briefly before we actually hit record, and one of the things I said was that, like, I ducked out of a 5K run last Thursday because it was 26 degrees and I thought that was a bit warm. So I decided I wasn't going to bother putting myself through it. I don't have any excuses left after talking to you. None at all.
Well, I mean, I think if, again, it's just a change in mindset, because I even experience it here. You know, I've been in Chamonix now a month. And there's been some days it's raining and I think, ugh, I'm not going to go running. And then I just have to tell myself, like, you idiot, you're going to be going back to Cobble and you will be begging to go for a run in the rain. So just go. I think if we, just shift our mentality to think about it as a privilege and an opportunity rather than something we have to do, then that really changes the whole thing.
I was just thinking as well, we're talking about the running, the very, very confined space. That's one factor. But another big aspect of the kind of races that we've talked about here is nutrition as well. I mean, what does your diet look like when you're training in Kabul?
Oh, it's terrible. It's really terrible. The first week I was in Kabul, when I started again a couple of years ago, I didn't have time to get breakfast because work was so busy, but I had a bottle of duty-free Baileys. So I had a glass of Baileys every morning just for the cream. So there was that.
Incredible.
No, it's a lot of just bread, oil, butter. I mean, those things are fine. I would really mainly just like eat eggs, fried eggs. If I tried to eat vegetables, I mean, you couldn't get access to a lot of vegetables, but there would be tomatoes and cucumbers. Then I'd usually get some kind of gastro something or other.
Oh man.
And sometimes I'd be working so late, I would miss the last, shuttle in time to get back to when the restaurant was open. And so then I would have they'd always have apple pie or potato chips. So that would be dinner as well.
It's a classic ultra runner's diet. I mean, it's a classic ultra runner's diet during an event where you'll basically eat anything that's put in front of you for the calories.
For the food that you eat in a race.
Yet nobody could argue that you're not adapted to the kind of stuff that you'd get at aid stations in a race. But maybe unintentionally here, you've given yourself a bit of an advantage.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, and I don't eat red meat either. So I think I'm quite iron deficient. Even now, I think. Oh, wow. I think I'm pretty iron deficient. Yeah.
Wow. So not exactly circumstances that are really conducive to training for ultra runs, but here you are with this incredible CV. How do you keep yourself motivated in those moments where your training run in front of you is 4 hours on a treadmill? Like it must get difficult. But you must also have got quite good at spending that time in your head. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think, for some people as well, they need a really strict training plan and they need to hold themselves to it. For me, I find it's best that I don't have a training plan. I mean, I have an idea in my head of what I want to do, but often that can be daunting. If you see 5 hours on a treadmill on a schedule, then you are going to be dreading that day. But if you just say, okay, I'm going to do maybe 2-3 runs today, see how far I go. I'm going to download a couple new movies and just, get some cheesecake, hit the treadmill, see how it goes. That works.
Get some cheesecake, hit the treadmill. What a sentence. You might have just sold the gym to me.
But, make it fun. Like, let's get a cool movie. Let's get, I listen to really racy podcasts when I'm running around the compound. And I just really love the idea of listening to, kind of like subjects that I'd have to listen to with my headphones on while I'm in a very conservative country. These kinds of things are fun for me. But, yeah, I think it's better for me to just see what my legs can do and also just forgive myself if my body's not up to it. I mean, you have to kind of find that line, because your body's never going to be up to 5 hours on a treadmill. But sometimes work was just so stressful. I would be able to run only 10 minutes and then my heart rate would be through the roof. And then it's like, okay, you need to just take a break, maybe come back tonight when, no one's around and it's calm and it's dark. So yeah, I think just trying to take things as it comes and trying to make it fun for myself. That really helped. And also recognizing that, like, I don't know, I've been able to run races on pretty shitty training, so I'm sure I'll be able to do it again. So the best you can do is good enough. And as long as you're always doing your best, then it's going to be fine.
You seem to have found an incredible middle ground here where you're able to motivate yourself under very trying circumstances, but also not beat yourself up when those circumstances are dictating what you can and can't do. And it's a tricky thing to do. And I think a lot of runners fall into a dangerous trap mentally. And I certainly include myself in this, of setting goals, not being able to reach them, and then it's a collapse. If you're not ready to face that you weren't able to achieve that thing today, it becomes a stick to beat yourself with. And you seem to have sidestepped that. Is that something you've learned over the years, or is that an aspect of your personality?
I think I feel quite lucky that I'm not a professional athlete. So, I mean, there's zero pressure from anyone else. I have gotten what I still think of as lucky in some of my races to do well. I still think it's because there's so few women in the sport, and so few women in the sport who want to do some of the races I do, that I'm just doing well by default. But to me, as long as you keep it in that mindset, if you're running and racing because you think it's a privilege, then, like, if you end up doing well, awesome. It doesn't mean I'm not competitive on the trail. I'm super, hard on myself when I'm racing, because I want to do well. But if I don't, it's like, well, great. You just had 4 days out running, and what does it matter what place you came in? And I think I'm kind of seeing a bit of that coming out during COVID, where some of my friends, all the races are canceled. And some of my friends are like, you know what? And I put myself in this category. It's fine. This is not the year for racing. Let's, just enjoy the mountains. Pressure's completely off. So we can just run as much or as little as we want. And isn't this a privilege? Whereas others, their identity is so tied up in getting that validation from a certain placing in racing that, they're really distraught by the fact that races aren't there. And I think maybe that impacts people who rely on it more for their job than, of course, me. So I feel quite lucky not to have that pressure. But yeah, it really depends what your motivation is. And for me, my motivation is always just to celebrate the privilege it is that both of my legs work, and that I have the freedom to be able to go out and do what I'm doing, sort my shit out.
And isn't that fascinating? I think it's incredible for people whose identities might be rooted in success, out whatever their measure of success is, while they're out on the trail and doing these runs. The COVID-19 coming in and making it impossible for us to all go out and get together and race has taken a big chunk out of them mentally, and that's got to be quite difficult. You've very much had a ultra running CV that's run alongside a career where you have faced deprivation and isolation over and over again, and had to form your love of running around very difficult circumstances. Wow. I mentioned the Barkley Marathons earlier, and it seems ridiculous to not go into that, but I think that's something that we could talk about for a good hour. I did an interview with Laz Lake just a couple of weeks ago, and it was just the best afternoon chatting to that guy. Obviously, sorry.
I'm kidding.
All right, you caught me out there. But yeah, what I'd really like to talk about is free to run. So if anyone is interested in Steph's exploits out on the Barkley Marathons, because you've attempted twice, right?
Yes, twice.
Yeah. There's plenty of stories to tell there.
I do have
you
a
said
blog
that like
post.
there was exactly. This is what I was about to say. So it's
how I became a loser, a quitter, and a failure in under 24 hours.
That is a big, quite negative sounding title. I mean, anybody who goes through there, I mean, Christ, what a monster of a race. What an incredible story. So yeah, if you're listening to this, don't be disappointed that we're not going to talk about it right now. Just go over to Steph's website. What's the what should they be typing in? It's Ultra Runner Girl, isn't it?
ultrarunnergirl.com. Yeah.
Perfect. So go do that. Go and read up on that. We're skipping over it now because what I'd really like to talk about is free to run. So for the uninitiated, what is free to run?
Yeah, so Free to Run is a charity. It's an NGO that I started in 2014. That uses
because you weren't busy enough.
Yeah, I was sitting in my tent in South Sudan putting together my business plans, and then I launched it in Afghanistan in between moving from South Sudan to Gaza.
Wow.
So it's an organization that uses outdoor sports and adventure to create female leaders in areas of conflict. So we operate in Afghanistan and Iraq. We've had kind of short-term projects in other places like the DRC and South Sudan and a refugee program in Hong Kong, but we're really focused on Afghanistan and Iraq. And our program consists of course, the outdoor sports, the hiking, we've even got stand-up paddle boarding,
awesome.
kayaking, skiing, all sorts of things. But also we've developed a life skills through sports curriculum. So helping the women and girls learn conflict resolution, mediation, communication, leadership, all of those things using sports activities, and then a volunteering component as well. Where they actually try to give back to their communities, working with people with disabilities or street kids. And, the whole idea behind it is that, in areas of conflict, women and girls are disproportionately impacted, by poverty, by restrictions on their freedom of movement, the kinds of opportunities that they might have in society. And through the sports opportunities, we're actually helping women to reclaim public space. And by having women more visible in a positive way, including helping their communities, it helps to change the perceptions, the ideas that members of the community will have about the roles that women can and should play in society. So it's actually about a lot more than just sports or just, running around happily hiking. And involves a lot of work with, parents, communities, schools. We in Afghanistan, we've got agreements with the Ministry of Education to actually have the people who go through our program, they then can implement it in the schools so it can reach a wider number of people. And, during the COVID situation, it's become so clear to us how important our program is, because while we can't do our normal group programming because of the COVID restrictions, the contact that we have with the girls and their families is so critical because, in this situation, lockdowns have been imposed in both countries, and concerns about gender-based violence have increased, concerns about parents trying to marry their girls off early and child marriage have increased as economic hardship deepens. And for some of these girls, Free to Run is really the only kind of connection external to their families that they have for support to try to help them actually avoid these really dangerous situations. So yeah, we've had to shift a little bit in these COVID situations, but it's really highlighted to us what we've always said, that we're about more than just sports.
That's fantastic. You're operating in areas there, and I think Afghanistan springs to mind in particular as an area where the outside world's view is that the position of women in that society is very restricted compared to what we'd be used to. I mean, under the Taliban regime, I can't imagine there was ever anything like this in that country. How have you had to push against a lot of walls to make this work?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I kind of knew the answer to that was yes, but
before I started the NGO, I didn't want to start an NGO. I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there who have an idea and they're like, let's start a charity. Let me tell you, please don't start a charity. It's a lot of work and it's not sexy. Like it's not fun. It's a lot about regulations and budgets and admin. But I tried for a year to get other more established organizations to incorporate more of these ideas into their programs. And there just wasn't a willingness to do it because they would see it as, okay, well, we can organize some indoor volleyball, for women a couple of times a year. And sure, that's sports, but that's not the idea. It's not where we were coming from. That's not the vision that I had for it. And I don't think it would have the societal benefit, the community change that I was looking for. So yeah, we've had to grow, what I think is like slowly but responsibly. And it's really in kind of listening to feedback from the women and girls, working with the parents, working with the teachers, working with the community members, so that it's not something that we're imposing on them as a Western idea. This is something that came from the girls themselves. And, we've had a couple of ultramarathon teams even, and that idea came from them as well. Because, I started to run we started with just a simple hike in the Central Highlands region of Afghanistan, which is one of the safest areas. And just with 10 girls. And I was speaking with some of them, a few others, during that week. And they wanted to hear about my own racing. And I said, someday I would love to have a women's team from Afghanistan do one of these crazy 250K races. And I said, well, why does it have to be someday? Why can't we just do it now? And, I had no good answer for it.
Yeah, who were you at that point to say, no.
Right.
No, we're not doing that.
Why do any of us think that we, have the right to sign up for a 250K race? If I can do it, there's certainly, no reason why they couldn't. And they did it. And, all of this sounds impossible and it seems impossible, but it's because we have these preconceived notions of maybe what they might want or what might be possible, or but I was wrong in all of those things. And so just kind of listening to the feedback and figuring out what they want, what the challenges were, how we could help them overcome those challenges. That's how we've grown with the organization.
And did some of those runners that were in that initial conversation, have they got to that level?
Yeah, so it was quite funny. We had the first two women that were on the ultramarathon. I ran it with them. It was in the Gobi Desert. And I had hired a female videographer to just capture some of the training we're doing. And she'd never run before. And she said, someday I would love to do what they're doing. I said, well,
you've said it now.
And she ended up joining our team, joining one of the ultra marathons and ended up working for us for a while. Was it 2 years ago? There's a marathon that we run every year in Afghanistan. And a couple of years ago, I ran with, a 15-year-old girl. She lied about her age. I thought she was 16, but anyway, 15-year-old girl wearing like sparkly jeggings. And, the marathon took us, I think, like 9-10 hours, but it was at 3,000 meters and we did it. I mean, the things that they're willing to just go try, it's really made me realize that, we're really limiting ourselves. If we look at a 250K race, most of us won't say, unless we've done it before, we won't say, oh yeah, I can do that. Why not? We would say, oh, well, I've got work. I've got this. It's going to be kind of difficult. I'm not sure. We think of all the reasons why we wouldn't be able to. And they don't. They just see it as an opportunity and want to figure out how to make it happen.
And what a beautiful mindset to be bringing into this kind of event, and the kind of hardship you are going to have to go through in training. Well, that's astonishing. And this is my Western ear picking up on probably what isn't entirely relevant here, but how does that even look from Afghanistan? And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but if I want to buy a new pair of running shoes tomorrow, my problem will be that I have 100 different options and I don't know which one to go for. How do you buy a backpack that's good for ultra running in Kabul? Like, what kind of say that first time you took 10 people out into the mountains, what did that look like? Are you able to give them access to the kind of equipment that they need to do this stuff?
Well, they all showed up in high heels.
Great start. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, yeah, there might be some issues on the logistical side of things with, proper running shoes and equipment, but that actually isn't the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is getting the support of the community members, getting people to a training location safely. We have to change up the places where we train. We have to change up the routes that we take. We have to make sure that, maybe not everyone knows where we're going to be training that day, but the driver will know and our program officer will know, and that'll be it. Just to keep the safety of the women and girls. We could have support from the communities and their families, but there's a lot of armed groups, working in Afghanistan. And there's also people who might not necessarily agree that this is something that women and girls should be doing. I think there's been a lot of positive aspects, a lot of change, and we're trying to work with that, but it doesn't mean that there isn't risk. So not to downplay, the challenge of finding the right shoes and the right equipment, but it's such a small aspect of it. I mean, some of these girls, they'll run 10K in flip-flops. Not necessarily advisable, but that's not the main issue. Similarly with those who we're working with in Iraq, we're working with people in Erbil and Mosul from Camp for Internally Displaced People. And, some of the families there are very conservative. And so it takes quite a bit of time to get their permission to allow their girls, their daughters, to leave the camp, to participate in, some kind of a sporting event without, the rest of the family. So that's where we spend most of our time and energy, is actually working with the communities and the families to help create the space for them to be able to experience these kinds of activities.
And what an absolutely different way of looking at running from the point of view of a Western world where, have we really run if I didn't share it on Strava and, share your motivational stories on Instagram? This is a very different thing.
We have a rule against sharing things on Strava.
I'd rather imagine, yeah.
Yeah. It's a completely different way of looking at it, and looking at what running and what being visible outdoors can do. Yes, it's a risk, but it can also open up space and opportunities.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. And what are you seeing in these communities? What benefits do you see in the community beyond just the women who are coming along and doing these sports with you?
Yeah, I mean, as you've just said, I mean, there are the individual benefits to the participants, but it's really the community change that I think is quite remarkable. Parents who never would have considered letting their daughters travel out of the province, never would have considered letting their daughters leave the camp for internally displaced people, never would have considered their daughters doing education past a certain level, never would have pictured their daughters not being married, at the age of 18. That's where we see the real benefit and the real change. I mean, it bleeds into all sorts of different aspects of their life, not just the physical or mental aspects of running. So that's where I think that there's the most exciting potential for change, and where we've seen change.
Fantastic. And look, if anyone who is listening to this at the moment, if they're interested in finding out more about what Free to Run does, or how they might be able to support your projects, even where should they go? And this is plug central now.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's get in there. Where should we be directing them?
So the website is www.freetorun.org. And we're also on Facebook. We're on Instagram as Free to Run NGO. That's a non-governmental organization. And if you go to any of my social media things, you can usually find a link for it as well. But we really do need the support, particularly during COVID with all the races being canceled. I mean, the New York City Marathon was a big charity fundraiser for us. And of course, the marathon's been canceled. So we've lost tens of thousands of dollars, frankly. So that's been a little bit stressful. And I know, you know, a lot of small businesses are in trouble, and a lot of other, you know, local organizations are in trouble. So we've tried to respect that, you know, particularly during the beginning of COVID, by not trying to do big fundraising appeals. But we're now at a point where other places are starting to recover, and Afghanistan and Iraq are going to be suffering for quite a long time. And the support that we provide to these women, you know, really, I don't want to be over dramatic in saying it's life-saving, but, you know, we have helped some of the girls prevent being, you know, married off as a child. And I mean, that's massive. And, you know, we've seen other NGOs kind of go under during this time. And that's something that we really obviously want to avoid, but we want to be able to come back stronger. So anyone who's interested, please do look at it, reach out. I think it's a great global community, and we can all get behind the same things.
So there you go. If you're listening to this, you already know, what are we, like an hour and a chunk in now, you already know that Stepha's here is absolutely remarkable, and the work that she's doing is absolutely incredible. So please go and have a look at the website, see what they're doing, and if there's any support you can offer, go for it. I'll make sure we've dropped the links in the descriptions for the show and stuff as well.
Thank you.
That's literally the least I can do, and if I think of anything better, I'll let you know. It's definitely, I guess at this point, it just remains to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time out to chat. I know you've got a million and one things to do. You're literally leaving for another country tomorrow morning. So I'm probably going to leave you to your packing and stuff now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Genuinely, thanks for chatting to me today. I really appreciate it. And I'll keep an eye out for future adventures. It'd be great to chat to you again somewhere down the line.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks so much.